Before 1920, Indian politics operated through elite drawing rooms and formal petitions. Resistance was a matter of polite requests submitted to the British administration. Then, the scale changed. Within months, the movement evolved into a phase of nationwide public mobilization. Millions of people across the subcontinent began acting in concert. Mahatma Gandhi orchestrated this shift. Having already led localized labor and peasant disputes in Champaran, Kedah, and Ahmedabad, he utilized his popularity to reach the rural masses. His simple dhoti provided a visual link between the political leadership and the Indian peasantry. Gandhi designed the non-cooperation movement as a staged, strategic effort to dismantle British institutional control. The strategy operated on two fronts. The destructive front involved peaceful resistance through the absolute boycott of British institutions and economic goods. The constructive front required the active establishment of parallel Indian-run national institutions to replace them. The Congress officially endorsed this program at sessions in Calcutta and Nagpur in late 1920. The immediate goals were clear: force the British to correct specific grievances in Punjab and the Middle East, and ultimately attain Swaraj, complete self-government. The Nagpur session of 1920 codified this shift, signaling a move from elite debate toward an organized campaign that would eventually pull in every layer of Indian society. To understand why 1920 became the breaking point, we have to look at this structural model. It reveals four distinct grievances that converged simultaneously to form the movement's foundation. The first pillar is economic. The First World War severely impoverished the Indian masses. The British colonial government forced the cultivation of cash crops while imposing heavy taxation, causing severe local inflation and widespread debt. The second pillar is political. In exchange for supporting the war effort, Indian leaders expected significant steps towards self-governance. Instead, the British passed the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms of 1919, a framework that retained absolute colonial veto power. The third pillar is state repression. Facing political dissent, the British implemented the Rowlatt Act in 1919, legalizing the arrest and detention of Indian nationalists without trial. When citizens peacefully gathered in Amritsar to protest these detentions, British troops opened fire. The unprovoked killing of peaceful gatherers in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre shocked the population and accelerated the drive for resistance. The final pillar is religious. Following the First World War, the British dismantled the Ottoman Empire. In response, Indian Muslims initiated the Khilafat movement to protest the removal of the Ottoman Caliphate, an issue of deep religious significance. Gandhi recognized that the Khilafat grievance aligned with the broader anti-imperialist struggle. By fully supporting the Khilafat cause, he managed to unite these demographics, forging a rare alliance between Hindu and Muslim populations. Gandhi's strategy provided a single, organized channel for these isolated economic, political, legal, and religious grievances. The operational mechanics of this mobilization relied on a strict prerequisite: absolute nonviolence and civil disobedience. This escalation ladder shows how the movement was designed to unfold. It began with an institutional boycott, individuals surrendering honorary British titles, resigning from government jobs, and refusing to serve in the colonial army. This expanded into a massive economic boycott. Indians refused to buy British goods. Piles of foreign-made clothing were gathered in city squares and set ablaze, while volunteers picketed liquor and toddy shops. The boycott then targeted the political and legal systems. Citizens refused to participate in the Legislative Council elections mandated by the 1919 Act and stopped taking their disputes to British-run law courts. To replace the boycotted British goods, the movement promoted Swadeshi, economic self-reliance. Hand-spinning the charkha to produce khadi cloth became a daily political act, building a decentralized, alternative domestic economy. Parallel national institutions were established to replace the boycotted colonial infrastructure. Private local panchayats were set up to resolve legal disputes, and independent educational centers like Jamia Millia Islamia were founded to educate students leaving government schools. Sustaining this immense logistical effort required resources. The Congress established the Tilak Swaraj Fund, systematically collecting over 10 million rupees. Simultaneously, thousands of volunteers intentionally courted arrest through the jail borough Andolan, overwhelming the prison system. This framework severed the administrative ties connecting the Indian populace to the colonial state apparatus. It was designed to starve the British system of the local labor, taxes, and compliance it needed to function. The central directives issued by the Congress triggered a massive response. Major urban centers effectively shut down as vast processions filled the streets. But as we look at this map of British India, we can see that as the movement expanded, local populations adapted the central planning to address their specific regional and socioeconomic conditions. In the United Provinces, the movement fused with agrarian grievances. Under leaders like Baba Ram Chandra and Madari Posse of the Ika movement, peasants initiated uprisings against the exploitative practices of Indian landlords and zamindars. Moving east, Birendranath Sasmal organized major agitations against administrative boards in Bengal, while J.M. Sengupta orchestrated strikes across the tea plantations and railways of Assam. On the Western Front, peasants in Rajasthan organized the Bijolia movement to protest forced labor and taxes. In Gujarat, Vallabhbhai Patel spread the non-cooperation strategy as an alternative to armed rebellion. In the north, the Akali movement in Punjab linked their campaign for Gurudwara reform directly to the non-cooperation movement, showcasing coordination between Sikh, Muslim, and Hindu communities. Down south in Andhra, Alluri Sitaram Raju organized tribal populations to link their anger over restrictive British forest laws to the broader movement, while the entire town of Chirala Perala vacated their homes to avoid paying taxes. The intensity varied by region. In Karnataka, the initial reaction from professionals was subdued. In contrast, the Mopila rebellion among Muslim peasants in Kerala escalated into intense, violent conflict. Despite regional variations, powerful figures like C. Rajagopalatari, S. Satyamurthy, and Periyar drove the organized political resistance forward in Tamil Nadu. But this rapid geographic spread exposed a risk. The non-cooperation movement was fracturing into dozens of localized, overlapping class rebellions, making it difficult for the Central Congress leadership to maintain strict disciplinary control. On February 11, 1922, this nationwide momentum came to a sudden halt. In Chauri Chaura, a group of protesters abandoned nonviolence. They attacked a local police station and set it on fire, resulting in the deaths of several police officers. For Gandhi, this violation of principle was absolute. Concluding that the Indian masses were not yet ready to maintain the strict discipline required for nationwide civil disobedience, he immediately called off the entire movement. There was also a structural concern. In several districts, the protests were turning into no-rent campaigns directed at Indian landlords. This move toward a class-based revolution directly conflicted with Gandhi's plan for a controlled movement involving all Indian classes. The colonial government exploited the sudden withdrawal. They banned volunteer corps, silenced the press, and systematically arrested the majority of the Congress leadership. Concurrently, the movement's religious pillar collapsed from the outside. The Khilafat issue lost all relevance when Turkish leaders under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk abolished the Ottoman Sultanate and dismantled the office of the Khalifa. As outlined, the movement had limitations: internal fragmentation, lack of deep rural traction, and a fragile reliance on religious grievances. But its significance is undeniable. In 2 years, it generated widespread anti-imperialist consciousness across millions. It also forced critical social justice issues into the mainstream. By weaving the fight against caste discrimination into the national agenda, and by bringing women into the political struggle in massive numbers, the movement expanded the scope of the independence struggle. The movement failed to achieve immediate Swaraj, but it altered the internal character of the independence struggle. It established the organizational template for mass participation that would later drive the civil disobedience and Quit India movements to success.